First of all, good to have you, Felix. And I think it would be good if we start with a little intro. I'll do mine very quick, and then we can do yours. So Mike, CEO of Fastgen, we're building a low-code backend builder where you can quickly build your APIs, cron jobs. We also have a hosted Postgres database. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Felix. I call himself, he would never say that, like basically the most requested and demanded product designer in Berlin. But maybe you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, what you're currently working on, just so that we have a foundation to start with.
Appreciating the high words here, Mike. It's good to chat to you. But yeah, I'm Felix. I mean, originally started as a founder myself back in 2015, 2016, building a photo sharing app back in the days. Similar to I think what you would describe today as airdrop. So it was really kind of my first entrepreneurial adventure, starting a company, but then also trying to create something that would significantly improve the lives of people. In that case, it was photo sharing. So I was trying to build a company that would, or like a software, an app that would simplify the way you would distribute pictures to friends. And I guess that was kind of my entry point into the whole startup scene and yeah, kicking off my first adventure. And I think even with that kind of first experience, I've quickly realized that creating something from scratch and like the whole process of creating something that hasn't existed out there is something I truly enjoy and also want to, you know, become better in. And been traveling a lot back in the days, went to San Francisco quite a few times. And that is also where I ended up, my good friend Patrick, who you also know, obviously. And we met at the Stanford campus because that's where we, you know, networked a lot and met many different people. And we got to know each other and started working together. And I joined his firm eventually called Mapify back in the days as a product designer. And yeah, basically since then have been, you know, designing the product and also the brand for approximately 3 years. So Mapify was quite a journey. For those of you who don't know Mapify, it's a travel social network that we, you know, initially started in Berlin and have been working on for the past 3 years or so. And then after Mapify, I joined Gorillas as a first designer and helped grow their design efforts and foundation. Quite a roller coaster. Gorillas grew from, I don't know, 5-6 people to almost 1,000 people within a few weeks and months. Crazy journey. And realized that the quick commerce space is actually an interesting space to be in 2 years ago. So, you know, stayed in that space and joined a few other companies, Arrive being one of them, which is a German-based quick commerce company that would deliver not groceries, but more brands, anything from Aesop, kind of soaps, to Lululemon, yogurt, you know, shirts, anything in between. And I continued supporting startups with product design. That's truly what I felt I can also have the most impact on. Partnering with founders early on, supporting them on their journey, and kind of helping them build their first products and help them create a design foundation that would allow them to grow afterwards. So Gorillas and Arrive were definitely two examples that have shaped, you know, my overall perspective on supporting founders. And then afterwards, I got quite interested in VC and especially the intersection of VC and design, since VCs are obviously supporting founders, you know, with capital, but and designers with like design effort and you know, user UX and review and user testing. And I realized, you know, that there must be quite a benefit in combining both of it, supporting founders not only with capital but also early product design. So I ended up joining Creandum, who's a Scandinavian-based VC firm, one of the top players in Europe. They've backed Spotify, Klarna, Trade Republic, and a few other consumer apps that I truly loved. And I felt like Creandum is the right partner, you know, to combine this passion of mine, design, with venture capital. And ended up joining the firm as a designer in residence. And I'm still part of Creandum, working there, you know, from time to time, supporting the portfolio as an advisor. And then I think because I've always been a designer myself and have been working on quite a lot of projects, purely myself, I realized that you can elevate the whole power of design even more if you work in a team. And I guess that's how we ended up starting Blossom end of last year, which is essentially a design team that partners with founders and leaders to create, next level products and brands or products and brands that people love. I guess that's what it's all about. But I can tell you more about that a little bit later. But I guess
that was a very good intro. I think we have now established that you know what you're talking about. So if people don't just trust my words, then they know that we have a very good talk ahead of us. So we called the whole conversation we have here the essential product design guide for non-designers, right? And I had a specific intention when I did that, because I have the luck of working with two co-founders who are both very good designers, but I'm really bad. I never really focused on it. I'm a content person. I never focus on what it looks like. I can build you stuff, I can write stuff, but then I usually have other people making it prettier, is how I think about it. But I think that you need some kind of like base level, or like not necessarily need, but I think like some kind of base level of design is super helpful. And I know that there's also some people listening here who maybe have a design role in their company currently, but are not actual designers. So what I would like to get at during the conversation that we have is that we just establish some just fundamental rules of what you think people should look out for, especially if they're not like self-taught designers or trained designers. And then we can dive a bit deeper into your own philosophy and also chat about when you should actually switch from having internal designers that are not really trained to getting someone either as a freelancer or a full-time person. But let's start with the basics. So we chatted about that like a little back, like it was a while ago, but let's assume now you have to design something. You're a solo maker, you don't really know much about design, or you are in a startup team and you're the person in charge of like making the product design. Where should you even start? Like what should be the first steps?
Yeah, I guess before I answer that question specifically, I just want to mention that what I find so interesting about design as well is that it is basically everywhere, right? And I wouldn't say you have, I think even though when you describe, you're not a designer yourself and you have no idea about design, I wouldn't say that's entirely true, because everything you use, like the fact that we're creating this webinar right here is a matter of crafting something, and it requires you to think about how do I approach that kind of thing. And I think design is quite similar, right? It's about creating something
yes,
and
I totally agree. I think I'm good at the interaction design or thinking about like the actual processes, but the visual part is what I usually think of first. But I also read this book, I don't like The Design of Everyday Things, where they talk about like how a chair is designed for like 20 pages. So I think I know where you're coming from. Yes, design is a bit broader, especially when you think about it.
It's super broad, and if you think about it, everything you see and touch and like look at, almost everything has been designed, right? If you look in my background here, there's a chair that has been designed, there's a phone booth that has been designed, your microphone has been designed. So I think it's always a question of what kind of design we are talking about. And I guess in this case it's UX, UI, digital interface design. But yeah, just to throw that in the room.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's assume we're building a software product. And let's assume we're talking about UI, UX design, and we need to figure out where do we start there.
Yeah, let's do it. I guess the reason I've mentioned is because of my first thought on this, which is design to me always starts with inspiration. And it means sourcing inspiration not only from digital websites, products, etc., but really from the outside world. Whenever I start designing something new, I would usually try to zoom out first and like look at what's the problem we're solving. Usually it's a problem humans have, people have, right? So what I would initially do is I would look for people who are having that problem and would start talking to them, source inspiration. What are they using today? What are things that they are doing while using it? And truly understanding, how do they look at the problem and how they truly think about it. And I would say that this is like probably the first step, putting design equal to inspiration. I think since it's such a visual and creative job, it it is truly important to get inspired. And that's also something we do at Blossom quite a lot. So every time, you know, before we actually jump into a project, we try to inspire each other by looking into what people are using today, but then also what is out there, what are new technological trends, what are, you know, who are certain people in that field who have been interacting with a certain product. So I think inspiration is the one. The second one is, you know, obviously your own phase where you start conceptualizing ideas. Yeah, right. I mean, once you've done certain inspirational parts and you looked into different mood boards and talked to certain people, I think very quickly the whole idea of, you know, what would be an MVP or what would be an early idea that I could test it with comes up. And what I would usually do is you know, we have tons of whiteboards here in the room, and we would probably, you know, just, you know, go in front of a whiteboard and just put thoughts on paper and put them out there. And it could be anything, could be really messy as well. Let's say you want to design a new sports app for your gym routine, right? Then, as I said, first step would be probably going to the gym more regularly. I guess that's also something I should do, even if we're not designing a gym app. But I would try to observe and understand the environment and then start conceptualizing ideas on a whiteboard or on paper, and truly think about what is an easy way for me to test this idea of mine. Because similarly to like building a digital product, or when you think about, you know, Y Combinator and how they talk about, you know, build something people want, I think it always starts with coming up with some sort of a simple test that allows you to further understand what you're building or designing for. And the same is true for design, obviously.
This is definitely something where I feel way more at home, because building something people want, talk to your users and iterate quickly. I'm very much at home there. So you definitely got me here. So step one, sourcing inspiration, you split it into multiple areas. Number one, just seeing what's out there in the specific space that you're in, but then also broadening the horizon a little and maybe seeing what other products that aren't necessarily related to what we're doing do something really well. I sometimes have that when we're thinking about features with Fastgen. I just see a feature somewhere else or something that I really think is great. And it isn't necessarily in the space that we're in, but I think about, okay, is there an application of this potentially, if it makes sense, right, in our space? So industry, I'll call it industry specific inspiration, broader inspiration, and then again, talking to your users or potential users or the people who have the problem, which could be in your company, right? Sometimes you're designing things internally. So maybe you have to talk to your colleagues or something and just like gather this. And then also importantly, conceptualize it and like write it down somewhere, either like physically on a whiteboard, maybe on like a digital whiteboard or something, maybe if you're a remote team. So it's not only important about getting the inspiration, but also structuring it in some way and making sure that you try to find some connections. That's at least how I understood everything that you said.
Correct. And the reason you're doing that is because you want to quickly come to the point where you can start testing your designs.
Yes.
Testing your designs means putting it into people's hand. And what you necessarily need in order to do so is you need to create something that you can actually test your idea with. And it could be anything from a Figma prototype to a paper where you've written down something and detail would have described your idea, or like it's always easier to talk to someone and then simultaneously showing them something than just pure words. So that's the reason I truly believe in like also rapid prototyping, which is something like, which is the idea of how do I create something without a lot of capital, without a lot of resources, and without a lot of knowledge, and use that in order to get a better understanding of what I'm building. And honestly, from a design perspective, that is super important, because what I see a lot of designers and non-designers, is starting to create a product or a feature before truly understanding if that's actually needed. And I got to be honest here, I think I've done that mistake multiple times in my career. Opening up my Figma board, jumping right into the design part, thinking about certain ideas that I would have in my mind, but then realizing way too late, no one's actually going to care and no one's going to use it. And I guess that is because I haven't used enough time in the phase that I've just explained, which is inspiration, but also conceptualizing ideas and testing those and talking to people about it. before you spend a lot of time on designing and engineering and making sure that it looks perfect.
Yeah, I like that. Let's talk a bit more about testing, because I think testing is usually or often undervalued, especially if you want to go fast. But the analogy that I always use is you can like sprint as fast as you want. If you're sprinting in the wrong direction, you will waste way more time than if you go like a little bit slower, potentially, but you go in the right direction. And I think testing is one of the best areas where that analogy is just 100% true. So let's talk a little bit about how you can test designs, because I think sometimes it's not that easy, right? You need to like put a little bit of work in to even see whether people understand what it is. So let's start, let's assume you have a Figma prototype, and then we can talk about like what if you only have a paper or something. But let's say you have a Figma prototype, like a click dummy, people can click through it. I've seen people do these like user interviews, or let's call them design tests, in very different ways. And some of them I think are better than others, but I would love to hear, like, if you had to explain what like a best practice session would look like where you test an actual design, are there any benchmarks or something?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up. I think testing is like the topic that people would rather either skip or don't care about too much, because it's sometimes considered to be the boring part, where you're not heads down in Figma designing, but actually, leaving your comfort zone, talking to people, and then also, most likely receiving a lot of pushback. But yeah, let's talk about testing. So there are different ways of doing it, obviously, and I think I would probably divide it into two parts. One is qualitative testing and one is quantitative testing. And I guess, and it's a little bit of a personal preference. It's definitely a little bit of a personal preference, but I truly believe in qualitative testing, which basically means that, first of all, you have to source individually the people you want to talk to. So like qualitative testing meaning talking to a person one by one, either on a Zoom call or meeting up in person. And quantitative testing being more like using tools like usertesting.com, where you have hundreds of people going through a test at the same time, and then you having basically a huge data set that would help you to evaluate certain decisions. But the difference is that in the beginning, especially if you're not a designer, I think you really want to make sure that you spend as much time with your customers and users as possible, and outsourcing kind of this first test phase using quantitative testing software won't help you in a way that you spend a lot of time observing how people use a product. And I think that's why I always, at least, tend really towards this first phase of, using the prototype that you've built, and then going out to people that I feel like are part of the target audience, and just putting my phone into people's hands and just really letting them play around with the prototype and trying to empathetically figure out how they think about that prototype and how they react. Are they confused while using it? Do they feel joy while using it? What are the things they get? What are the things they don't get? And I would even say that, yes, you can also observe these things in a Zoom call or like virtually. But I honestly believe that the best way in getting started, as quickly as possible is, look at your surrounding. And, I used to go out when I moved to Berlin for the first time, and the photo sharing app that I just talked about, in 2016 or so, I would go to the German Bundestag because I knew that this is a place where people would take a lot of photos. And since I was building a photo sharing app, I wanted to be around people taking a lot of photos. So I went there with my kind of first Figma prototype. It looked completely horrible, but it didn't matter because it was super valuable. And what I basically did is I just approached strangers and asked them, hey, I'm currently building this new app. Would you mind testing it, giving it a try? And it wasn't even a fully functional camera app back in the days. I didn't have the resources to build a whole camera app myself. It was really just a Figma prototype that would pretend that you're now taking a picture, and then you would have to swipe up the picture to share it to all your friends around you, and you would receive a little notification saying photo successfully shared to Lucas, Hannah, and Emily. And I gave them a little bit of context, but then truly wanted to realize, is that a solution or like an app they would use, and what are they thinking about it? And then out of a sudden, hundreds of questions popped up that eventually helped me again to kind of better iterate on that product. So I think if I would sum it up, testing is extremely important, and honestly, you can't do it enough. I would even say that even though I've done a lot of tests and a lot of designs in the past years, I think I could have. I always could have tested more every time, because testing is the only truth. And like I always try to remind myself, you're wrong until you test. Whenever I design something, I look at my screen and I try to remind myself, you're wrong. You're wrong. Like go out and test it, and you'll get the real answer, if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also sometimes very difficult to separate your own understanding of your application that you're building and seeing it with truly novel eyes from someone who doesn't have as much context. Because even if you test internally and send it to someone who hasn't used it before, they have so much more context about everything that's going on. But I mean, I guess like for consumer apps, you can just like go out. Like first company we built, we also we're dealing with consumers as one of our target groups. In this case, college students. So we just went to college campuses and talked to them directly. But we also had a product for hedge fund managers and asset managers because we were raising money from them. And you can't just walk into their Wall Street offices. So how do you think about that in a B2B context where maybe you have to use a Zoom call, or it's at least more difficult to get to the right kind of people that quickly?
Yeah, I think it always depends really on who is eventually using the product. Even when we think about a B2B company, there's certain audiences, right? So we've recently partnered with a company where the IT owner, for example, of a company would be the primary kind of user. So I think there would have still been ways there are still ways for us, and we're currently doing it, to get in touch with those kind of specifically IT owners of a company. So I guess even if you're designing for B2B, obviously it's most likely that a human person will interact with the product, and I guess for you it's your job to figure out who eventually will use it, and then how do you source those people. And sourcing candidates is extremely difficult. I guess that's the reason why usertesting.com is a multi-million-dollar company, right? I mean, they're definitely solving a huge pain. I guess it goes back also to my thinking around testing is better than no testing at all. So, if you have the chance to jump on a Zoom call with someone in your audience, then it's totally worth it, even though you might not be able to meet up in person.
Yeah, as long as you're actually testing with your target audience, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense to test with someone who is not necessarily your target audience, because then you might get wrong data points. But I get where you're coming from. You mean testing via Zoom is better than not testing? Yeah, that makes sense.
And maybe
Go ahead.
One last comment is what I also find interesting is the idea of you can always test two types of things. You can test your product and your idea, but you can also test your target audience, right? Because a target audience, defining an audience, is the same as creating a product. You are thinking about solving a problem for potentially a specific group of people, but you always want to make sure that, first of all, this is a product people want, but you want to make sure that this is a product those people want. And I think by talking to different kinds of audiences as well gives you a better understanding of are you talking to the right people or not.
Yes. One additional thought on testing, and then we can jump to the next point. How do you test whether, let's say you release a feature or you release something new in your app, how do you do an ongoing test that it's actually still understandable and works well? Because sometimes you have things in your application, whether it's web, mobile, whatever, that have just been there for a while, and you're not 100% sure at some point. It could potentially diminish the experience for people, but you don't even know, right? So is it then looking at the numbers? Is it looking at recordings of people using the app, and then you just see kind of 30% are just stopping at the same time? Or how do you do ongoing design testing is, I think, the question that I would like to get at.
Yeah, super relevant point. Especially the question of once a design is out and people start using it, how do you monitor kind of the attraction of it? Yeah, super good point. I think that actually goes a bit more into, so the way I think about it, there's pre-product testing and post-product launch testing. I guess we've now primarily talked about how do I test an idea when I haven't really launched it yet, and how do I make sure I'm building the right thing. Once I've launched a product, I think the whole kind of testing sphere phases a little bit more into the quantitative testing, meaning you can actually look at data, right? Which is super beautiful, because you can actually start looking into how people are using a product and how they're interacting with it, and what the drop-off rate is, and where people would exit, and why they would exit. And you can run A/B tests. And I think one tool that I always love using, especially when we design websites or interactive apps, is tools like Hotjar, for example, that allow you to look at heat maps, figuring out, where are people actually using their cursor? What are the areas on a website that are being used most? And it's super surprising from time to time, because you just wouldn't expect it that way. And also one interesting idea that one interesting insight I recently had is I was designing a homepage, and I've also designed like a product page. And I've spent a lot of time designing the homepage, especially sections on the homepage that you would only see when you scroll down. What I've then realized, throughout a few user tests, is that quite a lot of people actually directly use the navigation to jump into the product page. So like that was like obviously one learning where I realized, okay, maybe I should place some of the sections I've placed on the homepage rather on top of the product page to make sure they receive more traction. And it worked. So the conversion actually went up, but it always really depends on the case, right? I think there are other cases where I looked at homepages where people would truly, really scroll down in order to learn more about the product and etc. But yeah,
trust the data.
Trust the data and look at the data and try to understand it.
Oh yeah, but also like that's a point that I would like to add, because like data is definitely something that I look a lot at. Like I think I do like more post-product testing, at least nowadays. We did a lot of like pre-product testing while we were still like building and in public and private beta, etc. But it's very important that the the numbers you look at, that they're actually telling you what you think they do. Because with Hotjar or Segment or Post Talk, which I really like, it's very easy to make like a small mistake or like have a wrong understanding of like one specific like sub filter that you're using, and then drawing the completely wrong conclusions. So it's very important that you know, like that you exactly know what you're looking at. But okay, we sourced. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I mean, really just last comment. I think, if you have the data, yes, there's nothing more beautiful than looking into traction and data. But like, I think from my experience and my background, since I've partnered, many times with companies that simply haven't had a product, I think I was forced to think about ways of how do you design for something that doesn't exist, and how do you test when there is no product.
100%.
Right, basically.
Yeah, and that's very important testing, because we're talking again about running into the wrong direction, right? And if you test early and just notice that either the way you wanted to solve the problem or the audience that you want to solve the problem for are wrong, you're saving so much time in the long run. Okay, so we sourced inspiration, we conceptualized the idea, we talked to our potential users. Now we were very, very forward thinking and also tested it with prototypes, talked to users, showed them what we're doing. So like let's say they like it a little bit. What is like, is there another stage? Do you just push it live? What comes next?
No, it's this whole mindset of it's never done. Like I think it's super important to understand when you think about designing something, you shouldn't expect it. You shouldn't expect that you're able to finalize it in a way that it's perfectly great and like you'll never have to touch it again. Like designing something means you're constantly iterating it and you're constantly improving it. There's no single product out there that is successful that hasn't been iterated on for the last years. Look, take the iPhone, right? I think it's just the easiest example. There have been so many iterations of that iPhone model that they are constantly trying to think about what is it they can do better. And the iPhone is considered to be one of the best designed phones out there, right? But even in that case, they're constantly changing it. And the same is true for interface design. Once you put something out there, you see the reality of people using it, and you see the reality of the pain points it might cause. And I think it's just a wrong mindset of thinking, hey, now I've published something, I've launched something, so I'm good to go. I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to take it easy now. I think it's the opposite. It's, don't spend too much time designing something and kind of waiting until you launch, but rather think about launching relatively early and quickly with something that you feel proud of. It shouldn't be something that you absolutely hate. Like I think something we do at Blossom, at least, quite a lot, is we wouldn't show something to a client if we're not happy, or like if we're not proud of it. I think you should always feel confident in showing your designs, but at the same time, don't have your expectations at a level where your launch is being significantly delayed.
That is a very fine balance, though, right? Because
it's a very fine level.
Because what I like, it is not easy, because you don't want to launch a product that is actually really bad, right? From a design perspective or from a feature perspective. But at the same time, you have to launch the product while it's still not very good, because otherwise it will just take you way too much time. So striking that balance is definitely not that easy.
Yeah, it's super tough. But I also always try to remind myself that, if you launch something that is solving a problem, then people would still use it, even though it might not be the most beautiful UI people have ever seen, right? Yeah. If you truly solve for value, then people are still going to use it. I remember me using apps. Like there's this one guy who built a layer that you can put on Twitter that would allow you to search Twitter users based on location and industry. And it's, from a UI perspective, it's ugly, but from the whole functionality perspective and the value it gives me, quickly looking at Twitter profiles and within seconds is incredible. So I'm still using it, and I'm still giving that guy also feedback, which allows him to iterate.
That reminds me, do you remember when we met in New York and we used this app in the restaurant that solved the problem of individually paying, and it was like the UI was definitely pretty bad, but it solved my problem, and I was very happy that it existed. But we should have given them some pointers on the UX design.
I remember, but yeah, I don't want to talk about that app. I mean, yes, it solved the problem, but it was the most horrible app I've ever used in my life.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I would like to focus at least for a couple of minutes on the visual part of the design. Right. We talked a little bit about the mechanics, and we talked a little bit about the process, but I would like to give people, and then also indirectly myself as a potential recipient of that, some advice on how do you source the 80-20 design, actual visual design advice. What should you pay attention to? I can give you a cool example that a friend of mine gave, a friend of mine who works in the fashion industry gave to a friend of ours who's always dressed who was always dressed in questionable ways, and he was like, can you give me some advice? And then he gave him some very basic advice of don't mix too bright colors if they don't fit. Keep it basic. If you keep two black, white, maybe I think beige and gray, you can basically do things without causing too many problems. And then he also gave him some advice on this is the foundation of what you should wear, and you can combine a couple of things with it, but that's it. And so this is obviously I butchered it a little bit, but that's roughly what he said. And I think it really helped my friend. So is there some basic fundamentals, just wear a black t-shirt and white sneakers and you're fine? Is there a similar approach that you can use in product design?
I think so. There are so many. I mean, I guess really the first one that came to my mind is the beauty of reducing. Mm-hmm. Don't overload it with information. Mm-hmm. But it obviously also goes back to Dieter Rams, less is better, and these kind of the design philosophies. But I agree with the products I've designed in the past. I guess the best products, or the most successful products, were the ones that were quite simple from a functionality perspective, so it wouldn't be very overloaded with features, but focused on a very specific kind of problem or would solve a very specific problem in a very easy and airy way. So I think my first design advice would be, whenever you design something, think about is there something I could put out? Is there something I could, cut out, reduce? What is the most minimalistic version of what I've just designed? And when you're at a point where you think there's nothing more I can take out here, I can cut out here, then I think you're already on a good going in a good direction. I think the second one is playing with colors. I see many products out there where colors are just being spread everywhere, and you want to be very intentional about using colors. Colors help you to put the focus on specific things. So when you create a CTA, a call to action, which is usually considered to be a large button that allows you to go to a next step, you want to think about what is the actual color that I'm using on that button, so that I don't distract people, but get their attention to click the button. And I think by intentionally thinking about the purpose of colors, you are automatically improving the visual style of an app, because that would force you to reduce the amount of colors you're using, because as I said, right, it just shifts priorities and creates certain hierarchy. And I guess then another one would be try to design something that's friendly. I think one of the things that and I'm not just saying go for round corners. I think that's something I would usually do in my designs, because I truly like making it smooth and designing it in a way that it feels great and it feels nice and it feels warm. But I also think about the way you use typography. I mean, it's great to be bold, but then keep it simple. Like don't just have large copy everywhere. Really think about, where do I want a headline to be placed that really makes sense, and how do I use body typography, and what kind of typography do I want to use? Keep it consistent. Don't jump between sans serif and serif fonts all the time. I think truly understand why you're using a font, and again, keeping it simplistic. I think I feel like simplicity is something I shouldn't mention, because that's like obviously the core of everything we do. It's not simple to use, then there's no it doesn't make sense to me. And the second, and maybe to go back, the last comment on that one, design friendly. What I also believe in is design something that's fun to use, something that triggers emotions, something that's joyful. Because I think that is eventually what makes you use an app or a product more than an app from a competitor. If you are able to create an emotional bridge between your user and your product by creating those delightful moments that make the person feel in a certain way, feel comfortable, feel trusted, feel kind of appreciated, then that helps a lot when designing for a certain target audience.
Got it. Yeah, reducing seems to be a common denominator between those things. Like simple, reducing, don't overdo it with the colors, don't overdo it with too many different things. I think this is similar to the analogy of like what you should wear in terms of clothing. Too many different things, if you don't know what you're doing, because that's always the caveat, right? If you're really good, like a really good product designer, then you might be able to get away with it. But if you're not really good and you don't intentionally do these things and break from the norms, that usually leads you into a direction where design is suboptimal, I think.
Yeah. And one last comment, and I think an additional thought here is, what always really helps when it comes to making something look more pretty, more friendly, more structured, is giving it all a bit more form and structure, in a way that you don't just want to fill the screen purely with text and image and videos and illustrations. You want to think about the way you bring those elements together in a very structured way. So one thing that I always like to use, and I think if you look at some of the most beautifully designed companies out there, is using some sort of a background card that brings kind of those elements more closely together. So when you, for example, have a white background and then you use a super light grayish tone to connect certain elements with each other, that helps the overall interface look more structured. look more intuitive, look more put together, which helps, because with a lot of information, people quickly get distracted. And if you're doing a good job in the layout you're using and in kind of organizing certain elements, putting them together, that's a big factor.
Got it. In the interest of time, I still have a couple of questions that I had burning on my mind for a while when it comes to design. So one, like we're jumping a little bit right now, and I definitely want to still talk about how long should you do it on your own, and when should you hire like a freelancer or like a full-time person, depending on your product. But one thing that I definitely don't want to forget, because I've been in this situation so many times working with so many different designers, is how do you give good feedback to a designer? Because what I see happen over and over again is someone shows me or someone else, like sometimes I'm observing, shows them a design, and then the answer is, well, I don't really like that part. And then the designer usually asks, what don't you like about it? Or what should I do different instead? And usually the answer is, I don't know. I just know that I don't like this. I like this other thing better. I can't explain to you why. I assume that has happened to you because you're designing so many things. So
every day.
Yeah, every day. So firstly, how do you cope with it from a design perspective? Because some of the people in here like want to be the designers and then will give feedback. And then what can you tell to the other side that might be a bit more helpful if you get feedback, if you can't quite grasp the actual details? Do you know where I'm coming from?
100%.
Okay.
My answer is turn it around. Before you judge a design, give the person who designed it the time and the kind of flexibility and space to explain why they have designed certain things in a certain way. What usually happens is people design something and then they go to the person and say, what do you think? And then they start, this I don't like, why did you do this? This like looks super shitty. This doesn't make sense, without truly understanding, that might have been a way. Why? Because design, if it's good, it has to be intentional. It has to be thought through. And one of the biggest learnings that I had also in the past years is before I would judge a designer on his designs, I would give him the time, him or her, the time, to explain me why certain design decisions have happened. And this is super important because it really gives the person the chance to explain to you, why certain things have happened and why certain decisions have been made, before you jumping in too quickly with your personal and subjective feedback. Which brings me to the next one. Don't like try to not judge on a subjective level. It's super hard because you always take things quite personally when it comes to visual appearance, but always keep the kind of target audience in mind, right? Like when you're designing a healthcare app for care seekers, like, yes, you can judge about the overall simplicity of the app, but when there's a bold red button on the top right, there might be a reason for it, right? It might not be the most, beautifully appealing kind of piece of design you've ever seen, but there might be an intentional reason for it, which might be an emergency button for someone who's seeking care. So always try to think those things through. But I can also tell you, right, like I've received so much feedback on things that I've designed, and there have definitely been the times where I've been quite upset after those feedback sessions, being like, oh my God, I guess I'm just going to quit my design job here. Like, those people hate what I've just done. But it's something you get used to, honestly. The more you do it, the more you talk to people about the things you create, I guess the more of a shield you create, and try to take those things less personal, but rather,
I see it. Like the best analogy that I have from like my life as the CEO of a tech startup is not taking no's from investors personal anymore. I've gotten hundreds over the years, like from so many different types of investors, like doesn't bother me anymore. And I think it's like a similar shield that you have to build up when you're a designer, or like even if you're like an engineer, like there's always like specific like types of things that you have to decouple from your own like worth, or as a professional in that regard. And then usually that makes you better at your job as well.
It makes you so much better. And last comment, I think, since we know that design is so much about collaboration, and tools like Figma have proved that in the past few years, that, it is about, putting your thoughts on paper and then, you know, getting different kinds of input. I think you have to also be really good at it. Really good at, I think it's a part of you being a great designer is, you know, you being good at giving feedback, but also receiving feedback. And I think that is important to mention that yes, the one thing is, you know, you're putting on your headphones and you're in the zone and you're designing in Figma and you don't want to be disturbed by anyone for the next few hours. But afterwards, I think it's equally important that you are you have the ability to explain your designs to other people, kind of, you know, tell them the story behind it, you know, bring in more context, and then also the ability to listen. And a good designer is always a great listener. And if you're not a great listener, then you suck, because you're not designing for yourself. You're designing for someone. You're designing for other people. And other people meaning your customers, but also people you're collaborating with. So being a great listener is super important throughout the whole design process.
Yeah. I think we mentioned it before a couple times, but again, I like analogies. If you design a product and like my dad is the target group and not me, I would probably look at the design and would think I would never ever use this. But then if I'm the target group and you show the design to my dad as like a potential user, he either wouldn't have any idea what's going on or would be like extremely confused. And like, so I think it really like there's obviously like objectively more beautiful things, I guess, to some degree, like in terms of like rules and like, but it's like it's also like subjective to some degree. There's like very well designed apps that are not super beautiful, but that work extremely well. And like Amazon is a great example, right? Amazon isn't like the prettiest thing ever. Like I think, I don't know what your professional experience is, opinion is, but it works, right? It has worked for a long time. It works for a broad set of users, which is very important if you're targeting such a broad set. But yeah,
but it works.
Let's get the last thing in, and then maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions if anyone has questions. So let's say you're starting out your journey. Either you're in a startup, you're a solo maker, or even we have some. I see some people who work in like larger companies here. You don't have a designer on your team right now, like in whatever capacity that is, and you're doing it yourself. You're doing the process that we talked about earlier. You're getting better at it, but it's just not your main skill set that you want to develop, right? For some of them who are here at least. So how do you get from I'm doing my own designs and try to get better at it and do the testing to like when is the stage where you say, okay, I now need an external design person, either as a freelancer or maybe even like I need to hire someone full time?
Yeah,
like, where's the barrier?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most I guess most asked questions. Obviously, whenever I work with a new company and a new a new startup, then usually the founders ask me, "Hey, when's the right timing to bring in a designer, a full-time designer, someone who's constantly joining the team?" And I guess my answer is always rather sooner than later. And the reason is you always either you as a founder are super customer and user focused, meaning you spend a lot of time with your customers and users, or you're having someone in the team who does a lot of research and a lot of user tests and a lot of a lot of the job that helps you be very close with the people. Because here's the thing, when you create a product, you are doing certain product decisions based on market research and insights and user tests that you have you might have initially done. But the thing is, you as a founder or as someone who's leading a company, it's all about allocating capital resources and priorities, right? And you allocating resources on something that might have not been tested through is a danger for a business. So if you're kind of putting the whole engineering team on building a product that you have thought about, and they spent a month developing a product, then I think you really want to be sure that this is something people want. And when I think about the job of a designer, then it is basically ensuring that that the product has been conceptualized based on actual user data and user testing. And you remember in the beginning of this conversation, we've talked about inspiration, but then also concepting and testing. This is what a developer wouldn't do usually, right? Developers usually do UX on the fly, which is okay. It's not their job to sit down with users, all day long, or like think about, the way a designer would think about talking to users and doing interviews and research. So I think you want this person in the team at a very early point of time, because it will allow you to make better product decisions going forward. And what I also believe in is that you don't necessarily, so there are different scenarios. One is one of the founders, and I think your case is quite a good one. One or two of the founders are already quite good in product and design, right? I mean, you've built your whole website on internally, and you have been doing a lot of user research and customer interviews, etc. But that's not always the case, right? I work with a lot of founders where they're very technical and they're just lacking kind of the product knowledge and the closeness to their actual customers and users. So a designer helps in that way because, they're bridging basically research strategy and conceptualizing ideas and validating ideas with the core business and engineering partners. What I do believe in, though, is you don't necessarily have to hire a kind of a designer full time from the first day on. I think there are ways of outsourcing or like bringing in an agency such as Blossom or a freelancer that can help you to create a great foundation. But the overall question of do I need a designer, yes or no, definitely tends towards yes, because they will help you to make more profound product decisions based on the research they're doing. A designer who's not doing research, not a great designer. Design has, and we've mentioned that multiple times now, but it has to be intentional and has to be backed by data and data being qualitative or quantitative, doesn't matter, but you want to make design decisions based on customer talks that you have been conducting. So I guess that would be my answer, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And it does get back to my favorite advice that I originally wanted to put on my wall before I put the Fastgen sign there, which is build something people want and talk to your users, which is literally like my phone background, because I think you have to think about that constantly. And it doesn't really matter what you're building. It doesn't matter whether it's an internal product. It doesn't matter whether it's like a consumer app, B2B. It always gets back to that. But let's open it up. Let's see if anyone has a question. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A box that you're seeing, and then we'll see whether anything comes in. I think we have been pretty exhaustive. I think we covered a lot of things, and I already asked some people in advance what they wanted to learn. But yeah, if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to shoot them, and then we'll do our best to answer them in the next couple of minutes.
Another chapter that's obviously super exciting is how AI is evolving in design. But I guess since we just have 5 minutes left, I think this is such a huge topic. We might want to do follow up on AI. But I guess
I think it will definitely help bridge the gap for people who want to. I think we'll do two things. Like, number one, bridge the gap for people who don't really consider themselves designers and make them able to build like good enough things that they couldn't do before. But then on the other hand, I think it will also help make good designers much better. On the one hand, when it comes to testing, you will just be able to sort through more information more easily. And on the other hand, you will also be able to be pixel perfect or just like accelerate your workflows even more if you can just type the command, remove the person in the background, and it's done for you, and you don't have to like use your mouth to like outline. I remember back in the day when I was like doing like some like Photoshop, which isn't necessarily what we're talking about, but like some Photoshop work, and like you always had to like find the like last hair and then like remove them. Nowadays it's much easier. Is that how you think about it as well, or is it different?
I think the way I agree. I think the way I think about it, it just makes you a lot more efficient when designing, because the future of AI in design, and I've talked to the CPO of Figma about that, for example, is that it will assist you in designing products, and it will fundamentally help you to become more efficient in designing. Like, I used to spend a lot of time, trying to clean up the design systems I would build, trying to finds inspiration in different kinds of areas. And since we know inspiration is so important and crucial, AI can help you. AI can help you in that, right? Like I guess you can already go into Figma and type in like, show me 5 sport consumer apps, looking into different patterns. And I think the way you design using NI, or like your job as a designer, will also change in a way that you will less be the person executing the designs in a very detailed way, and more be the person who's just trying out multiple things and art directing basically the idea you have in mind based on designs that you have conceptualized using AI. So I think it will be way more about the ability to have an assistant helping you to find the right colors, helping you to find the right kind of button shape, by just allowing you to look at multiple things and then you making the best choice and decision based on that.
That makes sense. Hey, we got 2 questions in. The first one is also one of my favorite questions usually. So let's start with that one. Do you recommend any resources on the simple 80-20 design principles, like on the visual side, books, websites, anything?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there are many books, but I guess really my biggest advice is always, yes, I've read tons of books and we've mentioned a few in this conversation, but I think the more you design, the better you'll become at it. So what I would usually do is I would look at some of my favorite tools that I would use on a daily basis, Spotify being one, and I would think about redesigning it just for fun. So I would use my redesigning it or really producing it. So depending on, like, if you're just getting started as a designer, one of the best things you can do is open up your Figma and try to design the Spotify mobile app, just as a practice for you to get into design. And you'll quickly realize the way text fonts have been put into certain buttons and how shapes have been used within an interface. So I think, yes, reading and watching videos is the one, but my favorite kind of practice is, just design something you use on a daily basis. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use Dribbble to look up music apps and then just give it a go yourself and become better at it through exploration and through constant execution.
Yeah, I personally really like the design of everyday things. It's not necessarily like software product design, but it really opened my eyes to how many thoughts go into designing great products. And then I forgot the name of it, but there's like a book that talks about like all the design philosophies and strategies there are, and then just explains them on like 1 or 2 pages, like the golden ratio and some of the other things. I would have to look it up, but that was a really good one.
Also, I mean, I don't know if I can share something here, but I have one link that is always really helpful. I'm just going to share it in the screen. It's called degreeless.design. It's just like a collective of a lot of design resources. So if you're really into like what are the books,
that looks really good.
The articles, then feel free to look here.
Nice. And then last question for the day, because Felix is busy and has to start talking to potential users again, and jump back into Figma. Someone asked, can using Tailwind UI help teams build faster in teams where people have less design skills? And there's a follow-up, but let's start with that one.
I mean, Tailwind is a HTML UI library, right? Yes, most certainly. I think whatever helps you to ship something fast, and if you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to create UI components entirely from scratch just in order to test something. So 100%, use whatever is out there. Go for AI, go for headless, HTML component libraries. Put something together and go out there and test it. So 100%.
Yeah, I also know that like some people who I respect highly when it comes to like shipping out good products do use Tailwind or some related frameworks. So yeah. And then second part, also, do you recommend to follow a specific design theme or rather design more custom things with users, even if they are not the most beautiful?
In a way that I would always, is that a question about patterns?
So how I understand it is, let's say you have like one design theme and you just put it on like all your different like products and you use it, or do you do like more custom things, maybe for like feature A or feature B, depending on what specific customers say? That's how I understand the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally as a designer and as someone who's practicing a creative craft, you always bring your own style and kind of source to whatever you do, right? So I think you know, with time you establish your own design style and your own the things you like and dislike about certain things. And I think, you know, consciously you will always, you know, apply those things even if you're not trying to. And I think that's okay. I think obviously it's super important to always tailor your design needs towards your customers' needs. Meaning, you know, if you design a product for an older target audience, obviously it makes sense to think about accessibility and, you know, making sure that the whole design functions for a different target audience like yourself. But at the same time, I also don't try to shy away from using the things, from designing in a way that I like to. So my answer would be yes, I like to apply certain themes. And I also think that this is kind of my signature as a designer. Yeah, kind of creating this kind of design theme that I would continue applying to whatever I'm designing.
Okay, I think that was a good way to close it off. Thanks so much for joining us and teaching us all more about how good design works. If you if any of you need like more advice, you can find Felix on like lots of social media websites, and then also he's talking about like startups in his own podcast with Patrick, who we mentioned earlier, who's our most trusted product person. And so yeah, it was a pleasure having you here. We should do this again at some point in the future. Maybe we review a couple of designs together. I think that people would probably like that. Thanks for everyone who's joining. If you couldn't catch the whole thing, I want to send it to someone on your team. We will upload this on the Fastgen YouTube channel soon. So if you want to rewatch it, you can do that there. And yeah, Felix, hope you enjoy the rest of your week in Berlin, and we chat soon.
Love it, Mike. Thanks for having me. Speak soon.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Ciao.